This is Money Made Simple, the financial podcast that keeps it simple and gets to the point.
Kia ora and welcome to Money Made Simple, brought to you by Simplicity. I'm Liv.
And I'm Jenny.
And we are back for a very interesting podcast topic today, right?
Because I don't think either of us know where we fall on the side of this debate.
No. So kind of a classic Kiwi debate around whether you should rent forever or buy your own home.
Something that Kiwis talk about a lot. I know you fall down the odd Reddit rabbit hole.
Yes, lots and lots of discussions on the personal finance sub on Reddit, which I think there's a little bit of a divide between generations. So we've had a golden era of property over the last 30-ish years.
Yeah.
And so, you know, your boomers, your Gen Xers, probably some millennials.
So those generations have just grown up with the idea that they will, of course, buy a house.
Yes, which is quite different from a lot of overseas markets, a lot of Europe.
It's perfectly normal to rent for your whole life.
Exactly, yeah. But New Zealand has had this obsession. So I guess part of this is that the generational expectations are different as well. It used to be a lot more affordable to buy a house. It's becoming less and less of an easy dream, right?
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about the two sides and the pros and cons of both those options.
Yeah, exactly. Despite what your parents might tell you, buying isn't always better, especially in today's market and the strong inflation of property prices we've seen. I think I read somewhere that house prices have quadrupled within the last 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah, which won't
Can't continue.
Yeah, it's almost unsustainable because the more it inflates, the more unaffordable it becomes.
So the growth we've seen in the past is unlikely to continue in the future.
Yes, we can't predict the future,
yeah.
But it's an unsustainable thing for house prices to do what they've been doing.
Yeah.
So let's run through a few stats around home ownership in New Zealand.
You are the stat queen,
yes.
so hit me.
Let me read a couple of really interesting points that I've come across in doing research. So as of the last census, 2023 Stats New Zealand data, around 66% of households in New Zealand own their own home. It's gone up from about 64.5% in the 2018 census. But before the 2018 census, housing ownership was declining since a peak around 1991,
Right.
which was when I think around 74% owned.
Of households.
Sounds
That's a
crazy,
huge
right?
number, isn't it?
Yes, so we've gone down almost 10% since then. If you look at regionally, Auckland has the lowest home ownership of the country, which
makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense for a couple of reasons. So Auckland is at around 60% of households own their own home. Highest in the Tasman is around 77%. If you look at a little bit more granular level, the highest districts of home ownership are the smaller districts near Wellington and Christchurch. So, for example, you've got the Selwyn district, which is near Christchurch, has 80% home ownership.
Whoa.
Yeah. Then Carterton near Wellington is also really high at around 80%. And that's versus less than 60% in the Wellington central suburbs.
So there's a lot of things that are going to factor into that, right?
Yes.
Affordability being a huge one, city populations being more transitory. Once you've moved out to the burbs, you're more likely to have settled down.
Yes.
That may affect those kind of outside the main centre home ownership rates.
Another thing is that older populations have a higher proportion of ownership, and so people might go out to the regions to retire. So Coromandel has a really high home ownership versus Auckland. CoreLogic data from 2024 showed that the average first home deposit in Auckland had reached over $160,000.
There's a lot of money, isn't it? Even with KiwiSaver.
It's getting more and more out of reach to save up. And first home ownership's getting older, so people are having to save for longer. Yeah.
How does that compare to other parts of the world?
We are one of the most unaffordable places to buy a home in the world. So RBNZ data from 2022, so not completely up to date, but what I could find in terms of comparing us versus our comparable countries, we had the highest house price to income ratio out of all of our developed world comparisons. So New Zealand led the charge compared to Australia, Canada, Germany, Sweden. We've got some of the most unaffordable housing in the world.
Okay, so that sort of sets the scene. Now we're looking at a generation that it's not a guarantee that they're going to buy a house. They've got,
and they might not need to, right?
Yeah. So let's look at the pros and cons of both options.
Yeah, and I think it's probably really important to look at an example of the true cost of buying your own home, because a lot of people before they buy a house don't realise all of the costs that are involved.
They see the house value,
exactly,
the number on the sign, and that's it.
Versus renting. In New Zealand, the median house price is around $790,000 as at June 2025, Real Estate Institute of New Zealand data. In Auckland, that goes up to $990,000. It was actually higher than that before. The house prices in Auckland peaked at over $1 million.
Yikes.
Then just in terms of mortgage rate, 1 and 2 year fixed terms are sitting around 5% per annum in New Zealand. That has obviously fluctuated wildly in the last 5 years. It's gone down to around the 2% rate, which was extremely low over COVID years. And it's gone up to almost 8% in the last couple of years.
And when you think about like budgeting and planning, that is really, really hard to accommodate those kinds of changes,
swings.
Right?
Yeah. Compare that to renting. At the moment, according to interest.co.nz, the median rent is $600 a week, with Auckland averaging around $650 a week. And that has been more stable, interestingly, than the interest rate prices. So while
rent hasn't changed that much.
So
but mortgage payments would have.
Mortgage interest rates have varied.
So what are the other costs that you have to factor in when
so let's look
you're buying a house?
Let's look at $1 million house. Now, I know that that's not the average or median house price in New Zealand, but it's close to what the average is in Auckland, and we both live in Auckland. So for $1 million house, if you're going to buy it, you have costs upfront to consider. So one of those is the deposit. Usually this is 20% in general, but it can be as low as 5 or 10% as a first home buyer.
Yeah.
But we'll go with the 20%.
Again, for the simplicity of it.
Exactly. Yep. And so for $1 million house, you would have to have saved $200,000 for that deposit. Now, legal fees, these can vary hugely based on how complex your purchase is, but you can expect anywhere from around $1,000 up to $3,000 plus if it's a more complicated purchase and the lawyer has to do more work. Building report, often a requirement from the banks. That would typically cost between $500 to $1,000.
Right.
Or even more if, for example, there was moisture testing required. That would then put the costs up. So those are kind of your upfront costs.
Already starting to build up.
Exactly. You can kind of add up what those would be total. Then you have your ongoing costs, which is not just your mortgage. So you've got your mortgage rates at around the current 5% averages. So remember, you've paid $200,000 in your deposit. You then borrow $800,000 for the rest of your $1 million house. With a 30-year loan, that would be around $1,000 a week. Then you have rates. So you have to pay rates to the council. Again, I mean, when I was looking this up, it was crazy, the variation between regions. So Christchurch and Wellington have a lot higher rates than Auckland. So
the council set their own rates, right? So they
exactly. Yes, so it's not just based on your house value, it's based on where you live, the services there.
What's covered.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say that that's at least $2,500 a year, and that's paid quarterly in general. Insurance, banks will require you to have house insurance in order to have a house. Again, can vary wildly depending on whether your house has risk of natural disaster. So Wellington, Christchurch, Auckland floods now. That's why our insurance prices have been going up. Yep. In Auckland in 2024, the average were around just over $2,000, so $2,200, according to Money Hub. Wellington and Christchurch were significantly higher averages at $4,300 per year for Wellington and $3,300 average for Christchurch. So,
and they're most likely to go up over time, not down, right?
Yes. And then maintenance, again, varies depending on especially the age of your house. So you could have a really old house that costs a lot, or you could have a brand new house that won't cost a lot at the start. So you might be paying, say, $500 or less for the first couple of years of owning a new house. This can go up to thousands a year depending on the maintenance that needs to be done. So again, can vary hugely. And you can't really just forecast it in advance.
I guess if you had an apartment as opposed to a house, the cost might be quite different.
Like Body Corp.
Yes, having to pay the Body Corp fee, and then sometimes you have to pay for the building to be repainted.
And that might be more than the Body Corp fee, yes. Townhouses are similar agreements or arrangements, usually called Residents Association. You still pay a levy each year. So, different costs for standalone versus townhouses versus apartments. But again, I think people don't factor into the costs of owning a house. And then water, got your usage plus your fixed prices. When you own a house, you're paying for that whole amount. When you rent a house, you're only paying for usage. Your landlord pays for the fixed costs.
Wow, so if you're weighing up those two things, that long list of potential costs as a homeowner versus paying rent.
Yes, so let's
water.
quickly then go over the costs of renting.
That's going to be a quicker list.
A little bit more simple. So you have to think about, often you will be charged between, say, 3 and 6 weeks rent upfront, and that's for rent in advance plus the bond that the landlord, that's held by the tenancy services on behalf of the landlord. Which
will hopefully be reimbursed if you look after the property well.
Exactly. And then the ongoing cost is your rent.
Yep.
So if you look at the $1 million house, and I have an example of this myself, and we rent that house out for $750 a week. So $1 million house compared to all of those costs would cost you that 3 to 5 times your $750 in rent, and then $750 a week ongoing.
At this point, you think, God, why would I buy?
Yes. It's an interesting concept, right? So we've given the numbers, but there are pros and cons outside of just the costs, right?
Yeah, of course. So do you want to start with renting?
Yeah.
I was a renter for
many years.
A very, very long time. And
when did you buy a house? How old were you?
I'm not going to tell you how old I was. Quite recently. So I would definitely be above the average. But I rented for probably 20 years. And I'd say starting with the pros is flexibility. So one of the reasons we rented is because we moved countries and towns quite often for study or jobs. So being a renter means you can literally change your life, and it's not a big deal. Another one is the cost, just not having to pay all those bills. It's very easy to plan and to budget. There's more certainty about your weekly costs, and you're not factoring in all those variables. You know, when the dishwasher breaks, you call the landlord. Yep. That's nice, rather than having to buy your own. Another pro is weekends. So if I compare my life as a homeowner to my life as a renter, all we do on our weekends now is
maintenance.
Fix things. Yeah, maintenance. I'm married to a builder, so he probably goes a little OTT. But
I think part of that is trying to save those costs because, getting trades in is really expensive.
Yeah.
And so we will do as much as we can ourselves in terms of maintenance within what's sensible.
Yeah. Whereas as a renter, I feel like they had a lot more freedom. Our weekends were our own. If there were problems with the house, we just called somebody else.
No, I agree.
A real con for renting is that stability.
Yes.
So we moved to Auckland 7 years ago, and within 5 years, I think we'd had 7 different addresses. Oh. There were various reasons. A landlord sold the property to developers while we were living there. We had 2 instances during the COVID years of when landlords came back earlier than they'd thought. But when you're constantly worried about how long you're going to get to stay in a house, and we had a young family, like that was really stressful. So that would be one of the cons.
So there's different stresses in renting.
Yeah.
I think also pets. You sometimes can't have pets in rentals. Yes. That's a really hard one because they can be such a massive addition to the house, and also you can't make the home as much your own. You have to get express permission from landlords to make changes.
Yeah, and you might question why you would invest in someone else's property too if you wanted to paint it or do something. It feels more like a temporary home than a home.
Yeah. What about owning a house?
Yeah, it's the opposite of all those things. So where there's a lack of stability potentially when you're renting, that's not always the case. When you own your own home, you feel you don't have to worry about somebody else telling you what to do. It's your home. You can make it your own. So there's something really special about
satisfying.
The first wall of your own that you paint, or when you do something in the garden. Putting those roots down is really meaningful.
An example for me is we've recently moved into our second house, and my husband's super excited to landscape the whole garden and really make it kind of a haven for us and our pets. And it's kind of a bit more of an intrinsic benefit. It's hard to really put a value on it.
It's a feeling.
Yeah. But
some of those things can actually add value to your property when you do those things, but that's not always the case. So those are some of the pros and cons of both renting and owning.
Yes.
What do you think people should be thinking about when they make a decision for themselves?
Yeah, I think one of the first things you need to do is look at what your 5 to 10 year horizon and goals look like? Are you looking to put down roots and stay where you are long term? Do you want to have the flexibility that we talked about with renting, or the stability that we talked about with home ownership? How stable is your job? If the place that you live in might have a little bit of job instability, that might be a reason to
be ready to move if you need to.
Yeah, exactly. What are your plans for family and or pets? Pets are family, obviously. If you're going to buy a house, you need to factor in that longer term horizon.
So that's going to be different for everybody, right? You have to look at your own situation, where you want to be in 5-10 years, and make that call. The thing about renting, of course, is that it doesn't have to be forever. So for us, we made the decision to rent for a long time because it made sense for us up until a point, and then we bought a house. These are not necessarily lifelong commitments. You don't have to pick a team.
Yes. On that note, though, if you are thinking you're ready to buy a house, are you financially and emotionally ready for the extra responsibility? I think is a really important one, because
all of that adulting.
Yeah, the costs can be more than what you think they are. I think that's definitely happened for me. And do you maybe need some advice from a mortgage advisor or a financial advisor? Where we can't give advice or really a strong opinion either way. It's just all of the factors to consider.
I think an important thing is to take out the idea that you have to buy a house, that is the only way to set yourself up financially for the future. In lots of other parts of the world, I was thinking even some of those countries that you mentioned where it's more affordable to buy a house, actually a lot of people don't buy a house.
No.
They rent for life.
Yes.
They may stay in the same property and it may be their home, but they will rent it for the very, very long term.
So a lot of Europe has a lot of build-to-rent housing, which means it's built for people to be able to rent long-term compared to what New Zealanders typically do. And
so then you get the security.
Exactly.
That takes away one of the key sort of cons of renting, because you can sign a 5 or 10 year lease.
Yes, if you want to. And New Zealand is starting to see that. So Simplicity Living and other developers are starting to develop build-to-rent housing.
Yeah.
So if you decide that renting is for you for now, and I think also even if you actually decide to own your home, I think one thing that it's important to consider is investing outside of your home.
Yes.
So your own home is not an investment.
Of course. So we talk about this all the time, not putting all your eggs into one basket or into one house. There are lots of options, and KiwiSaver obviously is a great option for that long-term wealth building.
Other options like investment funds, which there's a load of options now. There's investment property. And that's something that we were talking about before this podcast, is you might not be ready to live in your own home, but you might want to invest somewhere else instead of buying your home that you live in, you rent where you live.
That might be a way to get on the ladder, is not to buy that dream perfect home. It's just a starting point. Yeah.
But I think the key is get to that starting point, make sure that you are thinking about your long-term future. So going over all of that, looking at the pros and cons, what would be your thoughts?
Well, I think I've played the game very well, actually. I rented for a long time and that suited us. I would say we weren't very good at saving alongside, but that's before I had my financial awakening. So now we're helping. Yeah, that's what I'm calling it. And now we own a home and we're at a different point in our lives. Our kids are at school and we want to put down roots in the community that we live in.
That soft side of it makes sense for you.
Yeah.
I think I'm kind of similar. We've gone a little bit hard investing in property.
Yeah.
I have some regrets around that. Investing in property is very much not without its risks. If I could go back, I would, again, not put all my eggs in one basket.
So you've had your financial awakening too?
I have, just a little bit after you. But I do feel the benefits of owning my own home. I think when you can make the changes you want, that is a little bit easier when you own your home to be able to manage all of that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think we have fallen on one side of the debate. But
yes, despite the financial evidence
burden.
Otherwise. Yeah. I think that's all we have time for today. We will put a load of resources in the show notes, some of those stats that we've discussed earlier on, and then Sorted and Money Hub have some great guides around house ownership and the costs involved so that you can explore it a little bit deeper.
For yourselves, yes. Okay.
But otherwise, we will catch you next time, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Liv.
This podcast contains personal opinions and is intended to provide educational information only. It doesn't relate to your particular financial situation or goals and is not financial advice or recommendations.
Simplicity New Zealand Limited is the issuer of the Simplicity KiwiSaver scheme and investment funds. For product disclosure statements, please visit Simplicity's website simplicity.kiwi.